Just a quick one here. Something interesting happened to me today. 2 days ago, I posted the link from the WHO, who you shouldn't trust and we shouldn't trust, but they're trying. I think, who knows? But they released a study that said that asymptomatic transmission rarely happens, and posted this. A lot of us posted this because the fact that they said from the very beginning that this thing could spread without symptoms was very scary, right? It's sort of a nightmare scenario for this thing, because that's not how normal viruses tend to spread, or this kinds of things tend to work. And it was never really proven, but the idea was absolutely used to craft our public policy, right? The fact that this thing, like, you don't know who has it, you can't tell, even though it certainly has symptoms. Once you get sick, you have the cough and you have other things, and that's how the virus gets out and transfers to other people. Again, that's normally how these things seem to transfer. But we used the horror fiction of asymptomatic transmission to try and explain what happened in Italy and what happened in Iran, and also probably what happened in China, even though we knew they were lying and pretending like they only had like a dozen deaths or something. The point is that the scary specter of asymptomatic transmission came out early. It was seized upon, and even though there were reports in the field and data to the contrary, let me correct that. Not exactly to the contrary, but there was data questioning that was the case, because there were a lot of smart people that said, hey, wait a second, if we're going to say that the headline is virus transmits without symptoms, that is a scary headline, okay? But the way headlines can be written makes that a very tricky and honestly kind of an evil headline to write, because even if you have 1% of the cases that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that transmit without symptoms, that headline is still true. Okay? Virus transmits without symptoms, right? That literally could mean anything from 100% of the time to 0.01% of the time, right? Because it's still true, because that's the way that headline is written, right? It's written to feel declarative, but really have a wide wide berth of interpretation there, right? And from the very get-go, a lot of us noticed that the media was pulling this shit, right? They were couching headlines and data that we didn't know for sure, and they were always erring on the worst possible interpretation. And they were writing headlines and making statements that were perhaps factually accurate, but designed to scare and, I think, control. I think that a lot of this was designed to control the population and convince us through fear to stay indoors. Now, who knows if this is, there were good intentions behind this. I tend to think that there were. Again, this comes off as a conspiracy theory, and it's not really. This is more of an observation about how the media works. But the fact that this article came out from the WHO, this report, and it was reported by everybody, that asymptomatic transmission was very rare, was the headline. And a lot of us posted it, and a lot of us said, hey, this aligns with what the doctors in the field were saying. Nobody said that it absolutely does not transmit with no symptoms, but the public understanding was absolutely right in the minds of suburban moms who are scared for their children. Again, I don't mean to be cliche or generalize here, but that's the target here. That's the population who everybody's kind of trying to convince either way, right? But when you say that virus transmits asymptomatically for 3 months, and you use that again, that assumption, right, to close down the economy, to close down schools, to force everybody to wear masks and coverings. And again, like I personally don't care about the masks. I wear a mask when I go out. I think I'm skeptical, but it's such a small thing. I don't mind doing it. Um, my goal has never been to be sort of an asshole, right? Like, that's not the deal. I want the correct public policy decision to be made, and so far we haven't made it. And the WHO issued this report a couple days ago, and then boom, yesterday, full force. There was a lot of articles, and they were forced to quote unquote retract their report that asymptomatic transmission was very rare. And a Facebook post of mine was flagged, first time I've ever had this happen, with the Facebook censors that said, hey, we're hiding this because this contains false information. And that's not a good feeling. I posted a CNBC article. I mean, it wasn't like I was posting, Jimmy's, Jug Band's blog post with, conspiracy theories on it. And honestly, who cares if I had? I actually, I'm not in favor of this censorship on any level. But they slapped this on a CNBC article. And I read the explanation, and apparently Facebook's little band of fact checkers, and this is interesting. And those of you out there who have this, who have access to this, should read this because it's very illuminating. What happened is the WHO in their report, at least in this instance, they weren't wrong. They weren't wrong. Asymptomatic transmission is very rare. It's exactly true. They did not retract that part of it. It's not, and this is the way it works, right? The everybody said, oh, they retracted it. They were wrong. They admitted that they were totally wrong, and it doesn't take a genius to kind of think about, like, well, gee, why would they do that? Like, if they were completely wrong, why would they come out with sort of an international declarative statement like that? Are they really that stupid? You know what I'm saying? Like, if they obviously had this data, and they knew they had to make a public statement, and they're not morons. They knew it was going to make a splash, right? So why would they do it if it was completely wrong? Well, it turns out they weren't completely wrong. They were right. And here's where it gets interesting. There are scientifically different classes of transmission, right? There's symptomatic, where you're, gushing, you're coughing and sneezing everywhere, and you're gushing viruses, right? And that's obviously what everybody thinks of having symptoms, right? And then there's pre-symptomatic, right? Which is, you think you're coming down with something, but you're not necessarily coughing or sneezing, right? You know, if you're at all aware of your own physiology, you're getting sick, and we all know this. We all had colds and flu, and we know when we're getting sick. You're like, oh no, better hunker down. But that would be pre-symptomatic. And then there's another type, and it's a pseudo symptomatic, I think, which is essentially mild symptoms, right? And this is where it gets scary, in my opinion. And the Facebook fact checkers and the Washington Post article, this was their opinion on why the WHO article or study was false. And they use this word false. And again, it wasn't false. Asymptomatic means that if you have the virus and you do not exhibit symptoms, and we know that this is the case for at least 35% of everybody that catches it, for all age groups, and asymptomatic symptoms, are extremely common in people under 50, and especially under 80, and especially under 50, meaning, like, 98% of people under 50, like, don't even know they have this, right? They get super mild symptoms. They think it's a cold, they think it's hay fever, they think, and the Facebook fact checkers, these scientists, said, well, a layperson doesn't know what asymptomatic means. They might confuse asymptomatic with pre-symptomatic, and a layperson might confuse asymptomatic with pseudo symptomatic, right? And so, therefore, we are tagging this report misleading. And again, this is very interesting because, you know, stupid people might misinterpret this. Again, the WHO study was not wrong. Asymptomatic transmission is very rare, but pseudo symptomatic transmission is apparently fairly common, which, again, it's mild symptoms. Like, nope, I don't, we're starting to play this game of, well, stupid people might think blank, so we have to adjust the facts to make up for that because we can't have stupid people doing stupid shit. And, I don't like stupid people doing stupid shit. Who does? But the point here is that at what level can you control that? You know what I mean? It's very similar to the Trump, the people drinking the fish book, fish book, the fish tank cleaner. I heard people drink fish tank cleaner, and I said, well, gee, good for them. Sorry, Darwin Award, right? Like, you can't protect stupid people from themselves. You can't protect, anyway. The point is that I was very surprised when I saw that there was a retraction from this, and I posted it. And again, this is something that I have based on the doctors that I know, the articles that I'd read, and also knowing from the very beginning that the media was leaning into fear, 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 fear all the time. Anything that could be left open for interpretation, they were always leaning in on the absolute worst interpretation. And it bothered me because it was very obvious what they were trying to do. They were trying to sort of use the fear, the noble lie, to force people, not force, but to scare people into doing what they felt was the right thing to do. It was about control. They felt like the best plan of action was for everybody to shut themselves inside, right? A very draconian, a very sort of knee jerk, you know, like overly strict reaction, right? And it very quickly made no sense to keep doing that, except that a lot of people were dug in, a lot of people were invested, a lot of people had put their opinions and careers on the line, kind of coming down and saying, this is the pathway forward, this is the only way out of this. And it was interesting to see them fight at every instance, tooth and nail, to keep people inside. Every time there was an article or a study or an opinion that came out that was like, hey, this, it might be good news. Like this thing does not transfer from tigers to people. And people were like, yay. And then there'd be another study come out and say, no, it may, it could, there's a chance. And then the suburban housewives were like, oh my God, there's a chance. Let's stay inside. There's a chance. This has been the entire narrative the whole time, which is just in case this thing is new and scary, we don't know for sure, so we're going to err on the worst. And the economy be damned, our children's health be damned, our children's education be damned. Honestly, our immune systems be damned. I mean, again, I don't know for sure, but there's a lot of very smart people that have brought up continuously that the fact that we're staying inside and hand sanitizing ourselves constantly is actually not super healthy. It actually is not the way we're supposed to work. And I tend to agree with that. Again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not recommending that to anybody, but that seems to make a lot of sense to me, right? Like we are handling this thing in a very unnatural, very like reactionary way. And we have been, and everything is fucking falling apart around us, and we refuse to pivot. We refuse to morph. We refuse to change our approach. And again, it's one of these things. It's hard to prove a counter negative, meaning like, everybody's saying, oh, now, they're saying that we could have had 60 million deaths, right? And the lockdown saved us. So, well, I've actually seen a lot of, evidence, I think, that says that the lockdowns maybe didn't make much of a difference. As a matter of fact, we know, especially from New York, that the vast majority of our cases came from the lockdowns. People caught this thing in close quarters, and that's what the data has been showing, and it has been showing that it doesn't live in the supermarket, right? It doesn't fly around like a mist. It doesn't transmit from kids. Kids just don't get it. I mean, some kids do, but it's like 1 in 10,000. And that is a much, much, much lower number than the average flu, or even like some other deadlier diseases that kids get. But we haven't allowed these facts that we know to change our approach. We have stubbornly dug in, and we have continually censored and tried to sort of dogpile and destroy people that dare bring up other options, other hopeful options. And again, back to this thing, WHO, their study was right. They're but they're claiming that it was retracted based on the fact that they're trying to redefine the word asymptomatic for the stupid public. And what they did is they are now lumping pre-symptomatic and pseudo-symptomatic into what they're calling asymptomatic. And so therefore, Facebook's new revised headline is the exact opposite of what the WHO's report said. Okay, so the original headline said WHO study shows that asymptomatic transmission is, quote, very rare, right? The Facebook response says asymptomatic transmission is significant to the spread of the virus. Literal 180. And they did that because they decided in their expertness to include pre-symptomatic and pseudo-symptomatic into asymptomatic. They literally made up a new category. They threw out the dictionary definition of asymptomatic, which means no symptoms, and they included just starting to have symptoms and mild symptoms into that because stupid people may misinterpret it. That's fucking nuts. It's not helpful. It's dishonest. And it's not fucking right. And shame on you people for doing this. Shame on you. You keep saying your heart's in the right place, but all you're trying to do is control other people. And you're trying to force them to do what you think that they should do. You are not using facts and logic. You are using manipulated media. You're using, the social media like censors, and this is bad, guys. You don't understand what you're doing here, and maybe you do, but this is not going to turn out well. People do not like their voices being suppressed. They do not like alternative sources of information being repressed, even if you think that these alternative news sources are bad or presenting bad information. The way it's supposed to happen and the way it's always happened is that bad information comes out and then people have a discussion about it. And what you're doing is you're not allowing that to happen. And it is very weirdly, ironically similar to this virus. You are trying to like artificially control something that naturally works itself out. It's messy, but it works out when you let it be free. You are trying to control things. Stop. It's not going to end well. And of course, when it doesn't end well, you'll probably try and blame us. You fucking bastards.